Welcome back to our midday session, and really, I think probably one of the most important sessions of our gathering, which is to get to the heart of our work, and that is hearing from the youth and advocates and folks who have, I think, great insight into the type of system that we're trying to improve and the type of work that we're trying to do. It is my pleasure to introduce Nate Bayless, who is the director of the Anna E. Casey Foundation's Juvenile Justice Strategy Group. Nate has over 15 years of experience in the juvenile group with social policy research, evaluations, and systems reform, and has been instrumental in expanding the work that Casey has been doing in this area. And he's going to be guiding us through a conversation with some of our youth leaders around giving us some thoughts and recommendations around the system. So Nate, if I could turn over to you.
All right, good afternoon. It's great to be here with all of you today. And I'm counting on the good people from Tennessee to save our food over there at the table. My name is Nate Bayless. I'm the director of the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Anna E. Casey Foundation. I really appreciate sort of the willingness of the CSG Justice Center and the excitement they had about having a youth panel at this meeting. I hope you'll agree that it's important. And I'm hoping that you get the most out of this time with four pretty incredible young people I've gotten to know over the last year. Through our Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, or JDAI, the Anna E. Casey Foundation has spent the past 2 decades working with state and local juvenile justice systems to safely reduce the use of confinement, mostly in detention and more recently in the use of incarceration and other out-of-home placements at the dispositional end of the system. Our focus has always been less about programmatic innovations and more about the decision-making of adults in the juvenile justice system, and focusing on decisions that especially focus on or impact the liberty of young people in the juvenile justice system. You know, in recent years, our expanded focus to the what we'd call the deep end of the system, or reducing confinement at the dispositional end of the system. Sometimes in doing so, it can get lost in the shuffle as we talk about evidence-based programs, as we talk about research. It can get lost in the shuffle the voices of those who are most impacted by the juvenile justice system, young people and their families. And in recent years, we've aimed a lot to focus on, in JDAI, and in our work on the deep end of the system, on family partnership, family engagement, and youth engagement. As I say that, and as we've done a lot of sort of sometimes pounding our shoe on the table and saying, work with kids, work with their families, engage them, partner them, when we looked internally and looked to what we were doing at the Anna E. Casey Foundation, it was hard to then say we were really following our own lead in this area. We talked a lot about youth partnership. We talked a lot about valuing the voices of young people, but rarely were we doing that ourselves at the Casey Foundation. Rarely were we turning to the voices of young people who've been impacted by the juvenile justice system. So we decided to do something new, and we decided to start our own advisory council of young people who are either currently or formerly in the juvenile justice system. The goal of being not to do so because it would look good, or not to do so that we would feel good, but because it would make our work stronger. It would make the work we do with juvenile justice systems around the country better if we had the voices of young people who've been involved with the juvenile justice system. So from the outset, as we sought to create a youth advisory council with our colleagues from the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, we sought to partner with young people to help us to establish goals for the council, to develop the application process, to review applications all along the way, not thinking we would do it ourselves, but doing it in partnership with young people. We received more than 100 applications from around the country for people to be a part of the advisory council. The criteria was being involved in the juvenile justice system at some point and being between the age of 18 and 24. We aimed to have 10 people on the council, but it was really damn hard to whittle down more than 100 applications, all of which were very impressive, all the way down to 10, so we landed with 14. Our Youth Advisory Council included 3 people who are incarcerated, at the time that we first started meeting, 2 of whom are still incarcerated. I will say the early lessons that we've learned, even though we've just started this year, have been incredible. We've gained so much from our youth partners, and we've gotten to see the best, frankly, of juvenile justice systems in the way that they've responded. Having 2 young people who are incarcerated currently in Missouri, who've been able to participate in every single juvenile justice advisory group function that we've had, either by teleconference or in person, has been really impressive. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to throw it to this group. I was, more than happy, really excited to be able to bring 4 of these young people, 4 of my colleagues at this point, I'll say, with me to Austin. And I think you'll find them to be just as impressive as I do. From your left to right, we have Quanisha, Michael, Daniel, and Hernan. And I'm just going to start firing away. Their bios are in your folder, so I'm not going to read their impressive accomplishments. But please do look at what they've done and what they're doing right now. So I'm gonna start. The 5 of us decided what we talk about today. The CSG Justice Center was very gracious by saying that the goals of this should be to explain the importance of youth partnership, to talk about problems in the juvenile justice system, and to offer solutions. And we really decided collectively what that should look like for this session. And so I feel good about what we already heard today. I think sets us up nice from what that the 4 of you wanted to talk about as we got into this session. So I'm going to start with saying we hear a lot, and we haven't heard as much today, but about the growing consensus and bipartisan support behind reducing incarceration. And usually that narrative is about low-risk, nonviolent offenders. Senator Whitmire implored us all this morning to talk about the violent kids, the high-risk kids. So I think we should do that. Let's do that on this panel today. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the limitations of the bipartisan focus on the low-risk, nonviolent offender narrative and its limitations for achieving juvenile justice reform. So Hernan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, it works. It doesn't have the little green light on. So thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and to, again, share my experiences, both personally and professionally with all of you. And I think when it comes to the bipartisan work around, nonviolent offenders and how we treat young people who commit nonviolent offenses, I think we have done a great job at reaching a consensus that young people who don't commit violent offenses should be treated right, and that they should be given opportunities in the communities from which they're coming from. And our research and program has focused around that. But the question really is, what about that violent, disorderly, dangerous young person? Terminology and language that we use commonly to describe the young person who commits violent offenses. And I'll be very frank with you. For those of you who know me in the audience, I was charged with attempted murder going into the system. And so I was that violent, disorderly, dangerous young person. And I'm now sitting in front of you today. So the narrative that we've used for young people who commit violent offenses, I think there's a need for us to rethink that. And I think the bipartisan work around the country hasn't done a great job at challenging that narrative. And even here in this room, the language that we use when we're describing young people needs to be thoughtful and mindful to that we have people in here, as was mentioned earlier, with influence. And the language that all of you use impacts the way society views young people who commit violent offenses, but also, again, places more priority over the young people whose needs might already be met currently with what we have going on. And we're forgetting about the young people whose needs need to be met more because our systems are not doing a great job at that.
I would agree. I would add that, it's important to address those kids who do commit a serious offense. And we tend to just kind of write them off, and most often than not, transfer them to the adult system. And I think if we keep seeing youth as, dangerous and, all those negative terms, then we will continue to hurt a lot more kids. And so I think we gotta refocus our resources and the whole rehabilitative term back to all kids, not just some kids.
And I mean, just feeding off a little bit, Brian Stevenson, who leads a lot of work around the country and is a well-known leader in this work. He stated it best recently when I saw him speak in New York, and his comment was that you don't need an elaborate system to protect the people we like. We need an elaborate system to protect those we dislike. And that is often the narrative we hear with young people who commit violent offenses, right? That these young people are a threat to public safety, that we can't manage them out in the community. And so we want to put them in secure settings that are filled with violence, that don't have adequate supports, and that don't meet their needs. And so when we put them in those environments, if you went in for a violent offense and you're being put into a system that perpetuates that violence, what is going to be the outcome? Violence plus violence equals positive. I really see a contradiction in that. And so keeping in mind that when we're having those conversations about the nonviolent offenders, that we don't forget and or exclude the young person who commits that violent offense. Because again, I think both myself and Daniel can speak and attest to the fact that although we went into the system for those offenses, the people who we are now, the result of that was because we had people who actually said, you're leaders, you're capable of change, and you're actually able to impact change when you go out there if you put your mind to it. And I think that positive narrative is essentially what led me to being in front of you today, what led Daniel, Michael, and Q over here, all of us being in this work, because we didn't just, all of the blue just become, an exception. We were guided by individuals, staff, and people like yourselves who believed in us. And so, again, reminding all of you of that is important.
I just want to add that when I was thinking about sort of decreasing incarceration for low-risk youth, I thought of it like, yeah, it's a good idea, but it's forgetting the point, because when I think about decreasing incarceration, I was once a low-risk youth who eventually became labeled as a high-risk youth just because of my recidivism rate, I guess. And so with that said, when I was low risk, right, decreasing incarceration, I've been given many opportunities by a judge with the help of a very responsible, very motivated, great public defender. And so I've been given a lot of opportunities, like from my first couple of experiences in the system. The judge says, yeah, he's doing good in school, we can let him go this time, or we can just give him probation, or maybe substance abuse. And then after the third time, he was like, you know what, Michael, I'm tired, enough is enough, let's try something different, right? And so I was low risk at that point because I wasn't doing anything that wasn't a misdemeanor, but I was still involved in the system, and eventually it led to my incarceration. So it wasn't like I was less likely to get incarcerated. It was like it funneled me into being incarcerated because they didn't provide enough focus, enough intervention, enough. They didn't address my needs as a low-risk youth. And so I think that sometimes it takes away from the point. It's like, okay, we're going to focus primarily on decreasing incarceration for low-risk youth because they pose no risk to the system, but at the same time, you're not really addressing the needs of the young person, and so eventually they're going to get involved in the system. And so I just think that another thing is it ignores the high needs of those youth who are already incarcerated. So those young people who are already in the system has already filled them. They need specialized services, they need more concentrated resources. We sort of take away the focus on them when we're only trying to bring young people who are low risk out of the system when we're not addressing the needs of those who the system has already filled. And so it's kind of like on one end you're trying to do a good thing, but then on the other end you're not really looking at how it's impacting those who've already been involved on a different scale. So
My take on it is, Can you hear me? Okay. My take on it is, despite the status of the youth in the system, they are still young people. They still have the room to grow. We need to stop highlighting their flaws, and we need to focus and praise their strengths. And the thing when it comes to labeling, like Daniel said, just writing them off and not affording them the second chance as a low-risk offender is just already placing them on a back burner. And they're at a disadvantage before they even begin. And so when it comes to high-risk young people that are labeled as high-risk offenders, it just seems like they're the ones who are labeled as high-risk offenders are already on the back burner, and they're stigmatized for not cooperating fast enough, or seen as to be detrimental to society. But at the end of the day, these young people are developing, and if it takes more resources and if it takes more time, then so be it. That's what needs to be done. And I think my colleagues said everything else the best.
So I want to just chime in because, you know, one of the ways in which the limitation of focusing only on those who there's already so much consensus on keeping them out of institutions. One of the ways I think that plays out, and it was really interesting hearing Dr. Kaufman and Dr. Latessa this morning, is the issue of transfer. So every state in this room transfers young people to the adult system, which seems to go completely in the face of the idea of doing what we know works, based on the lessons that we were taught this morning. So, you know, in particular, I want to sort of think about that for all of you, because somewhere along the way, something happened that gave you a second chance. And transfer seems to sort of end that chance. It basically writes off young people as saying, we've given up, and we're now going to treat them like adults and give them adult sentences. So I'm wondering if maybe a couple of you at least can sort of speak to that.
I can start off by sort of sharing, and probably most of you know this, in New York State we have the unique law that at 16 years old you're automatically tried as an adult. And we're one of two states, the other one being North Carolina. And so I ended up in the juvenile justice system because I was 2 days shy of my 16th birthday. Had I been 16 at the time of the offense, I would have likely never have been in this room with you right now. But because I was sent to the juvenile justice system, and I will not sit here and say that the juvenile justice system was any better in New York at that point in time when I went in there, but it was definitely different being amongst my peers rather than being amongst adults who'd been, who probably have led lives of criminal behavior for longer periods of time. And to put it simply, the adult system is just completely different than the juvenile justice system, and we know this. So I ended up getting sentenced to 6 years in the juvenile justice system as opposed to 18 in the adult system. And while I was in the juvenile justice system, I have to admit that it was individual staff who took the time to really bring out my strengths. And oftentimes it was going out of their way. It wasn't even because the policy said that they could do this or that. It was because they themselves took initiative and did something that was out of their job description to get me the things that I needed while I was incarcerated. And I got my GED while incarcerated. I got 54 college credits while I was incarcerated. I worked in the kitchen. I worked custodial maintenance. I worked in the library. I mean, I kept myself busy, kept myself, involved in things. And we talk about the positive youth development model. You want to keep young people active. You want to keep them, doing positive pro-social activities, not being in an environment where violence is the only way out of that system. And oftentimes it was I go to college, I'm engaged in pro-social activities, I go back to the unit, a riot breaks out, and all of a sudden I'm locked into my room. So how that played out, in the juvenile justice system was, fairly different. No different than the adult system, but again, just the idea that I was able to get a college education while in a juvenile facility, and that I was exposed not to the overwhelming, violent culture of the adult system, really allowed me the opportunity to, again, grow, make mistakes, because I still made many mistakes while I was incarcerated, But people not focusing on those mistakes, and as Q said earlier, sort of focusing on my strengths was essentially what drew me out of a life of crime and led me to being a college student when I came out into the community, even though that transition in itself, much like the adult system, I had no supports when I was coming out.
I can go ahead and chime in on that. I think that so often we place young people into adult facilities just because of the nature of the crime, and that can be both very traumatic and very digressive, because you're spending much more taxpayer dollars on it, for one. Two, it's not effective. My whole idea about it is, okay, one, you're breaking up the family, because before you had them in this detention center where they probably have, let's say, 1 or 2 phone calls a week, right? But on the adult side, it's totally different. Like, you have to have money just to use the phone. So you can't even communicate with your family, right? And I think that it's like, for instance, I know that right now in the District of Columbia, with any traffic court-related case, such as a young person is driving without a permit, fleeing from law enforcement, reckless driving, anything related to vehicles, it goes to traffic court, in which a young person has to be placed in adult custody. And I remember that because when I was 16, I had, got caught for like reckless driving and fleeing from law enforcement. And they let me out, but I had to come back to court, and a bench warrant was issued because I forgot my court date. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, I'm doing good right now in the community, so I'll go back to court, the judge will throw it out. And I went back to court, and I had to be held on bond in an adult facility for 30 days because my parents couldn't afford to pay $500 to get me out on bond. And I couldn't really talk to them, so I had to get, people there to try to call my family for me. I felt so degraded and so isolated, in the sense of I just felt deprived, like I just let myself down or something. But I just feel like not only does transferring creates more isolation between young people and their family, but this whole issue of putting young people in the same space as adults who are totally different and gets treated totally different just because of the nature, without any other consideration to any other factors, family, education, is not effective, and it shouldn't be that way.
So,
Yeah.
So I'm mindful of our time with everyone, and I don't want to be the downer to talk just about all the sad things going on in the juvenile justice system, when I know that when we talked on the phone, you guys were really excited about talking more about, so what made a difference, right? Like what actually mattered for all of you. So if we shift away a little bit from the sort of how can the system do less harm towards how can the juvenile justice system do some good for young people who come into its care. Can you talk about the kinds of experiences or people that you came across that made a difference for you and your peers as you sought to turn your lives around and chart a different path?
I'll start that off. The thing that me and my colleagues have in common is that we all met someone down the line. We all developed a relationship with someone in the juvenile justice system who went beyond just being a probation officer, who went beyond just being a therapist, who went beyond just being a case manager. They stuck their neck out, and they developed a relationship, an individualized relationship that needed to be developed for us to stay on that right path. And with my personal experience, I was in and out of secure detention for 5 years straight. I mean, the most minimal thing I got confined for was not making my bed. It was a probation violation. And it wasn't up until I entered into a drug court treatment program. And the people in that program made a huge difference. I came into contact with a caseworker who didn't merely just stigmatize me for the mistakes I made, but like gave me pep talks and helped me fill out a college application or set up an email. And then I had judges who were compassionate, but they were still stern. And you never get to see that kind of side of a judge, especially when you have 20, 30 dockets during the day as opposed to going to a program where they can have more intimate time with you. Again, and they definitely provided incentives for the good behaviors. It was always the good things that happened that week, and then something that we can work on that happened during the week. It was never, oh, let's talk about all the bad things that you did and let's punish you for it. Let's talk about all the good things you did, praise you for it, and then let's work on, or let's try to fix what we can do next, and come back next week, and we'll come back and you report how it got better. And so I just want to say that it's relationships and mentorships that is really important, and we can all speak to that. So with that being said, I'll hand it off to my colleagues.
I'll go next. For me, the biggest thing was school. You know, when I decided to kind of distance myself from the negative environment that I caught myself in, and decided to, you know, leave old habits. For me, it was school. You know, where I was incarcerated, California, the county Santa Cruz, happens to be a JDI model site, and I don't want to put them on a pedestal because I still think they have many flaws, but their education system there was definitely a strong point there in that facility. And so for me, it was school. You know, when I distanced myself from everything else, that was my main thing. And, you know, going back to mentorship, is that school teacher that made the whole difference for me. You know, she, you know, even after I decided to kind of turn my life around, even though I would mess up afterwards, I mean, she stuck by my side, and we just, you know, it's that genuine love and care that she showed me that just made the whole difference to me.
I can be very brief. I think for me it was really opportunity, variety of opportunities, and having people who were not going to give up on me no matter how tough I got on them. Because mind you, I was a very, very, very problematic child. And I was very disobedient and did not like authority. And so you can imagine me sitting here and amongst all of you who are, again, leading systems and authority, I didn't know how to talk to authority in the past. But again, I think having that, actually, I have a question for the audience. How many of you here today have actual daily interactions with the young people that you work with? That's a pretty good amount. And I ask that question because oftentimes, again, it goes back to those, you know, that connecting to those young people and actually having daily interactions with them, and having that, you know, ability to say that the director of, you know, this agency actually believes in me and or wants to see the best for me, and like that influences the culture in the facility as well as promotes the positive sort of goals that a young person might have while they're in the system. So again, sort of a reminder to everyone in the room that if you haven't dealt with your, you know, having gone into your facilities and having met with young people, and I think it was Senator Whitmore who mentioned that, you know, some people don't understand the complexities of their populations if they're not close to them. So you need to be close to the young people that are in your systems, because I think that will lead to some change for some of them as well.
Real briefly, I think for me it was more exposure and with the combination of structure, because as a young person, I was just very inquisitive and I was all over the place, and I just needed something constructive to do with my time. So other than going to school, I still have all these unaccounted for hours of the day where it's like I'm not doing nothing constructive, nothing positive. So what do I do with all this time, right? And so for me, it was like being in a place where not only a juvenile justice agency had a vested interest in me and wanted to see me succeed, but they wanted to see me succeed so much to where they had an inquisitive mind about who I was and what I wanted, what my needs were. And because of that, I was like, look, you know, I just don't know what to do with my time, and I just need structure, and I just need some sense of direction and some exposure to opportunities. And so I ended up going to a military program for 5 months to get my GED. But it was the perfect structure for me in that I had something to do with my time every single day. And it was constructive, it was positive, it pushed my limits to thinking, I had to study. So it was a good combination of exposure and structure at the same time. And a lot of young people just really need someone to push them, and just really need someone to have high expectations and to provide a sense of support and structure so that they can move forward and push themselves. So that's what it was for me.
You know, in all the conversation about the what works, it strikes me that the juvenile justice system is inherently a time-limited thing, right? Young people come in and they all leave. No one stays in the juvenile justice system forever. So when we talk about what works, it's all a conversation about what's there while you're in the juvenile justice system. But talk to me about your experiences of coming in and then leaving, and how the juvenile justice system did or didn't, and what it could do to support you, your family, your community as you transition away from the juvenile justice system.
I'll just speak briefly about my experience, and I look at the juvenile justice system in D.C., Washington, D.C., as being unique in that probationary services doesn't work. I have many friends who've been through it, and it just didn't work for me or them. But being committed or being a part of, like, considered a ward of the court or state was it gave you resources that you would never get under probationary services. Like the amount of resources they invest into the young people and that agency makes it such that if a young person sort of took any initiative to and had the proper support, that young person can really do well, like myself, and go to college and really make a difference. And so for me, being committed was a great opportunity, because what happened is it allowed me to step up. Because here you had support saying that, hey, here's this opportunity, we'll give you the job training for it, and you just have to interview and you can get the job. Or you interview and you can get your own place and we'll pay for it. And so for me, it set me up to become self-sufficient, so that once I was no longer committed at the age of 20 I was independent, I had life skills, I knew how to budget, and they set me up to look at the system as only being temporary. And even till this day, they still help me with college. Like, they give me $3,000 a semester to support college, even though I'm not committed no more. But that agency is based off of a positive youth development model. And so they're more interested in your development and seeing you succeed than they are getting you out of the system. And at one point, before my commitment was about to be up, I was actually advocating to remain committed just so that I can get those services, because it was so much. And so to me, it was like I had a lot of support. They invested a lot of time and attention in me. And it was a supportive effort. Everyone in the agency just really came together and had the same vision from the leadership on down, like to the line staff. And so for me, it helped me to look at the system as being temporary. Like, I'm not going to be connected to it all the time, but I remember that agency and I talk about it all the time.
For me, I think the system, what I think it failed to do for me, is I was incarcerated when I was 14, and I got out at 19. So, at 14, I'm a kid, no responsibilities, doing whatever kind of wild, And then at 19, I come out and I'm being told, you have to get a job, you have to go to school, you have responsibilities, you have this, and that, and nowhere during my whole time incarcerated did they prepare me or provide me with real life experiences of how to be an adult. So for me, I struggled with, I struggled for a long time in terms of how to be an adult and what a man should be or what that looks like, because I never had a father figure either. So it's like, I think it failed me in my reentry program in terms of, just preparing me, knowing what to expect when I got released. And I see that happen so many times. And I just think that's what they felt me, I felt. And as far as family, I wish my family would have been more involved in my courts, in my probation meetings, because they were clueless, and they're Spanish speaking, so me trying to translate all these legal terms to them was even hard for me at that young age. So I just would hope that the systems will get the family and the community more involved in in terms of reintegrating young people back into the community.
And with that being said, the resources just needs to be there. In reference to families, I think that sometimes families are just vulnerable and they're seeking assistance. I know with my situation, my mom, she didn't know who to call. So she was vulnerable. Whenever she felt overwhelmed with me, she would call my probation officer. But unbeknownst to her, that would just push me further and further into the system. I know that's not what she wanted, but she didn't know what else to do. And so I believe that in order to better support the families, the family needs to feel a sense of security that doesn't involve potentially placing their child back into the system. And so as far as supporting community organizations, we need to provide a framework that allows the community organizations to be in that young person's life for more than just 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, you know, and so the family can have something to depend on and have someone to call on without placing their child back into the arms of the system.
Yeah, and I think I'll quickly say that my story is similar to Daniel's in the sense that my parents too are undocumented, and I had to translate even what the judge was saying to them every time I had a chance to meet with them. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up that I think failed me across the board was this mentality that we have around we need to fix the family or we need to fix the young person versus we need to help them identify the issues that they have going on so that they can fix it themselves. And I think that was sort of a continuum that I kept seeing over and over, which the emphasis was on helping to fix myself and my family, but not necessarily teaching us how to go through that or helping us go through that process individually. And so by the time I came out, I was expected to, similar to Daniel, learn how to reestablish a relationship with my parents, learn to reestablish a relationship with my 4-year-old daughter. And those things I think should have been a priority over the span of the time that I was in the system.
So in the limited time we have left, I want to talk about youth partnerships in general. One of my fears of doing this panel is that Q, Michael, Daniel, Hernan, not only would be seen as exceptional as when you read their bios, where they're at now, in spite of what they're all describing as their experience in the system, but not only would they be seen as exceptional, but that they'd be seen as exceptions, that they're somehow different, up and above of everybody else. And I love these guys, they're great, but I think they would all remind me over and over again, all of the states in this room have Hernans and Daniels and Michaels and Qs out there. So, help me with the playbook here. How is it that everyone in this room can do more to find youth partners and to make them a genuine part of changing the way the juvenile justice system works?
I'll start. I think it's changing that narrative that youth. I often hear that youth are just youth, and if we continue to just look at them as kids or incompetent or whatever that may be, I think that's going to limit ourselves and the kids. So I just think we need to look at youth as leaders because they're going to be here tomorrow and we're not. So I think if we have to bring them to the table as far as youth partnership and have them be around the table when it comes to decision making that's going to affect them personally or the people around them. So I think that's important to change that narrative right there.
I think, broadly speaking, when we're talking about youth partnerships, I'll speak from personal experience that I've sat at a number of different boards ever since I got out of the system. And every time there's this thing where I'm there just to have a box checked or for someone to be in compliance with something. And that shouldn't be the case, right? Like there should be a meaningful process by which my input is being included in every decision that is being made when it comes to policies that's going to impact myself, my peers, and my community. And so not only is it about changing the narrative, but also following the process through and ensuring that we have young people engaged at every step of us developing new policies and programs. Because if we don't do that, we're again excluding a very important perspective. And I think one of the more insightful perspectives, since these are the young people that have gone through the system. They've seen the complexities of it, they've seen the horrors of it, they've seen the problems, but they also know the solutions to some of those problems. And so acknowledging that, or looking at young people when we're talking about youth partnerships through that lens, will lead, in my opinion, to better outcomes for young people, but also better policies and better programs.
With that said, I think we should look at, because I mean, we all on this panel right now, we get that we're exceptional. It's not that we feel the sense of course we feel a sense of accomplishment, but it's not that we look at it as like it wasn't going to happen. It's that when people say that you made it despite the odds, right? It's like that. You should look at it as people that works in the system as an indicator that the system has failed, because we shouldn't make it in spite of the odds. We should make it with the odds. The odds should be in our favor. And so with that said, we shouldn't have these high expectations, or it shouldn't be like check the box, right? It shouldn't be like we have an expectation of this youth to be engaged for this particular reason. It should be that we genuinely need your input because it's important to push our work forward and to make the kind of changes to the system that needs to happen.
I just want to say we're not exceptions. We're just blessed. And honestly, I feel like we got lucky, because somewhere down the line we met someone who we connected with. And not a lot of people may have the personalities or the outgoing, or the inquisitive nature that we may have had. It shouldn't, for me, I was worrisome. Once I got out of the system, I called my therapist and I said, can you help me fill out my college application? And she said yes. Some people are not like me, and it shouldn't be me trying to reach out to them or to someone who can help me. It should be them reaching out to me, and it's like with youth partnership, it puts a face on the whole thing, and it shows that something's working, but we can tell you what it is. We can tell you what went well, and we can tell you what went wrong. And so I think it's important to really take what we say seriously, because we have different levels of expertise and different levels of experiences that can put insight and to make people think about something that they never even thought of. For example, we've been all given this opportunity to speak to people or to be a part of something huge. Little do Nate know that we're developing professional development. Every day that we do things like this, we're bettering ourselves. And if you give youth the opportunity to do the same thing and invest in something, they can continue to be on that right path, just like us, the exceptional ones. So. Thanks, Nate.
So I just want to, the last question I'm going to ask is, having gotten to know the four of you over the last year, you and your colleagues on our council, I know how passionate you are about juvenile justice reform, and I know that some of that has come through today. So you've got 50 states in the room, and you can say whatever you want to them. As you leave today, what do you want to say? Each of you, why don't you take a couple minutes and just share what your thoughts are?
I can start off, and I think all of my colleagues here will have a whole bunch of other things to say, but I think I want to bring it back a little bit. I know MacArthur's funding this, but the JDAI conference, where actually James Bell was there, and we also had Juan Gomez, who spoke about sort of the racial and ethnic disparities in our system, but also expanding that narrative from black and white to multicultural, multiracial, and acknowledging the fact that we have young people in our systems that, again, represent the various communities that we all come from, and some of those communities, again, are made up of different ethnic of cultural, different cultural groups. They're made up of different value systems, and that we need to consider all of that when we're developing policies. I think as leaders in this work and as people of influence, I think reminding yourself sometimes that you need to go back to those communities and see what it's like before you create a policy. It's important. You can't create a policy out of an abstract understanding of what your communities look like when that policy is being created. Because it doesn't allow you to see the complexities, it doesn't allow you to see the makeup, and it also doesn't allow you to see where the issues lie. And so, again, expanding that narrative of the racial and ethnic disparities in the conversation around juvenile justice reform to not only black and white, but multiracial, multicultural, and considerate to everyone's backgrounds and needs.
I'm gonna take it over to the adult transfer. Back for a minute. We talk, we talk about what works and being data driven behind our policies, yet decide to transfer youth to the adult system because of the seriousness of their crime. And to me, I was tried as an adult when I was 14 years old, and it's just. I just don't think that's the right way to approach juvenile crime. We have to understand that. Luckily, where I was at, I stayed in a juvenile facility when I got tried as an adult. But like in New York, as I was saying, it's like you get sent to the adult system, and I mean we gotta understand what we're doing when we're doing that. That we are limiting that kid's future. We are basically setting out his future when we. Short-term and long-term, a juvenile in prison, I mean, is that even right? I mean, does it even sound right? And so, and when he is released, like, what is that gonna do? He's gonna have a criminal record that he got when he was 14 or 10 in some states, if I saw the slide correct. And it's, I just don't think that's the right way to approach juvenile delinquency, and that would be my main thing.
I think another speaker spoke earlier that changes and changes in the juvenile justice system is a marathon and not like a race that has like this start time and this end time. It's a continuous process, and therefore we shouldn't be looking at. Yeah, we should have goals and these aspirations to take these big leaps in reform efforts, right? But we have to really sit back and acknowledge and appreciate the small incremental changes that we make every single day. And I want to echo Administrator Listenby remarks of his first presentation he gave. I think it was his opening speech or something. But it's a brief story, right? And you guys have probably heard this before, but this old man who enjoys going to the ocean to write, right? He goes on to the beach one day after this huge thunderstorm, right? And only to find all these starfish washed onto the beach, right? And then off in the distance, he sees this little boy, and every so many steps, the young person will get up and he will throw something into the ocean. So as the older gentleman approached him, he said, "Hey, boy, what exactly are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm throwing back the starfish into the ocean because they've been washed onto the shore, and if I don't get them back before the sun begins to beam, they're all going to die." And he said, "Well, boy, you do know that there are tens of thousands of these things out here. You're really not making a difference, right?" And so, with that being said, right, sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that story, because the young person's response was that he picked up another starfish and threw it as far as he could into the ocean and then told the old man, "I just made a change for that starfish," right? And so with that being said, right, sometimes we have these busy lives, right? And it's like we really want to make a change, and we all know that we have the opportunity to make a very positive change in juvenile justice reform. But with all our busy schedules and our day-to-day mandates and all these different deadlines that we have, sometimes we question how much of a change we're really making, right? And it's like, do we have the time to make the change that we want, right? And you never want to give the response of the old man. You want to recall the person, and you want to recall that situation and define that moment as, do you want to be the old man or do you want to be the young man with a very positive outlook? Because that young man embodies the same characteristics that each and every one of you in this room should have as a juvenile justice advocate. He is positive, forward thinking. He takes risk. He knows that he can't save all the starfish, but he's still going to throw as many as he can back into the ocean. So these are the kind of character traits that we should all promote, that we should have, and that we should give back to the community, because that one starfish or that one young person, right, will then go on and encourage, influence, and become your future lawyer or your future human rights advocate, or, you know, your future juvenile justice advocate on a national scale, your future state representatives, congressmen, who will, you know, then probably create a program to foster employment for formerly incarcerated young people and make a huge contribution to the field of juvenile justice. So that one small incremental change, that one small piece of your time that you invested could go a really long way. And we have to start thinking about it as, at the end of this world, at the end of our lives, what do we want young people to remember us by? And if you can embody and have the same vision that that young person had, you will know that by making a concerted effort in your day-to-day lives and having those same characteristics as that young person, you will make a huge impact in the juvenile justice field that can also have a huge impact in other areas of the world, such as poverty, because that young person no longer has to worry about food, or another area such as mental health, because that young person developed some new findings on medication and how to treat mental illnesses in juvenile justice. And so my only question to you is, what do you want to be remembered by the young people when you have dedicated all this time to juvenile justice reform? What difference did you really make?
I don't even want to work.
Bring us home.
You couldn't let me go first.
I was,
I just want to say that you go home, you think about the different professionals and the actors involved in their different fields of the juvenile justice system, and you think about how good they are at their jobs, and they fit every qualification, but it takes a really special person to just go beyond that job qualification. And it may seem abstract, but it makes a huge, huge difference. And you let those people, those professionals, the actors know that once they find something positive in that young person, you let them run with it. You run with it like their lives depend on it. And you walk them through it. You hold their hand if you need to, and you instill that confidence in that young person to continue to do well and to continue to stay on the right path. And so with that being said, it's just a matter of placing a sense of confidence and support in the community rather than placing or relying on the juvenile justice system. A lot of the times we go to a program or we're given a service in the justice system, but we have to go home. And a lot of times home is not really positive for us. So we need something positive to go home to. And so if we place, the resources and the right people within that community, that young person can have something to go home to and to look forward to. And again, it makes a big difference when trying to reform the juvenile justice system, so we don't have to rely on the juvenile justice system, so we can rely on what's in front of them, the community and their families. So.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening, and thanks to our panel for
Thank you.